Welcome to Azure Databricks Dashboards. My name is Brian Cafferkey, and I am a data and AI consultant for BPC Global Solutions. And if you're looking for any kind of consulting needs in the area of data and AI, I'm your person. Spark and big data are my particular focal points, as well as anything with machine learning and data science. All right, so one of the things I want to talk about in this subject matter is it possible you could actually replace Power BI with Databricks Dashboards? And if you're not familiar, Databricks is not only something that's part of Azure, but it also can be run on AWS, and Databricks has its own cloud platform as well. However, if you see my other videos, you'll learn that on Azure, it's probably the best platform because there's a lot of integration work that's going on between the two companies. So I want to call your attention to where you can get the notebook that I'm going to be demoing here, which is on github.com/bcafferkey/shared. Actually, I have a ton of content out there. Most of it is related to slides and content related to my YouTube videos, so take a look at that. Also, take a look at my other videos, especially on Azure Databricks. If you're not familiar with Databricks, notebooks, any of that stuff, I have a lot of videos out there, more to come. And under the folder, when you get to shared, look specifically for this one, is Azure Databricks Dashboards. So it's just a notebook. I have to give you a caveat. There's a lot of sort of pre-work in order to get to the dashboard. So I provide the files there. They're CSV files. They're based on AdventureWorks. You will need to upload those and create tables in your Databricks Workspace and that type of thing on your clusters so that you can actually walk through the examples. So a little extra work on your part. You don't really need, I think, to run the code samples. You can just take what's there and kind of cut and paste it and tweak it to what you need. That's usually what I do. So let's jump in. Where are we going in this presentation? I'm going to talk about what is Azure Databricks very quickly. I've got other videos for that, but I don't want to, in case you're in here and you just want to look at this, I'll give you a quick sense of what Databricks is all about. And I apologize if I tend to say SPAC instead of Spark. I'm from the Boston area. We tend to drop ending R's. Not sure why. This one's in the middle, but we still tend to drop it, so we tend to say SPAC. Apologize for that. We also say CA. Anyway, if you hear that, that's me trying slipping up. So we'll talk about how to create your own Databricks dashboard, features of Databricks dashboards, and Power BI versus Databricks dashboards, and when it might make sense to use one or the other. Now, Databricks, I focus a lot on Azure Databricks, but again, that is a flavor of Databricks. Databricks is not part of Microsoft. It's a separate company. It runs independently from Microsoft. So although Microsoft did work a lot with Databricks to get integration, it can run on AWS, and it does, and it can also be Databricks' own cloud. I'm not sure if it's on Google or not, but my guess is you could get it there as well. All right, so hopefully you can take a look at that. Again, bcafferkey/shared and Azure Databricks Dashboard. A lot of content out there. So very quickly, what Databricks is. At the center, and by the way, I am fully branded with my Python mug today because Python is my favorite language to work with on Spark. I said it right. So at the center of Databricks is Spark. This is Apache Spark. It's part of the Apache Hadoop project. Many different things. You've probably heard of things like Kafka and MapReduce and blah, 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 and all these different tools, one of which is Apache Spark. Spark is an open source big data platform. Can scale out to petabytes. It's that type of thing, and it is the hottest big data platform out there. It's really surpassed MapReduce. Legacy was called Hadoop, and yeah, it's a really powerful platform. It's great. It supports SQL. It supports all these great things. What Databricks does is, at the heart of it is Spark, and I should point out that the founders of Databricks, two of them, wrote Spark. So that's pretty significant in itself, and Databricks itself is the largest maintainers of the open source Spark project. So a lot of ties there. What Databricks does is provides a really nice, powerful, and user-friendly wrapper around Spark. This is a necessary thing, in my opinion, because Spark itself, to me, is kind of like your television set if it was all unplugged and you had wires hanging out, and the only way you could change channels is you stop wiring plugs and take wires up and plug them together and say, oh, okay, I've got channel whatever, and I'm connecting to this. The point is that Spark itself is a very raw service. It doesn't have any it doesn't give you any extra tools around it. You can plug things into it, so you could bring Jupyter notebooks to it. You could use, say, PyCharm or RStudio, but out of the box, you get no UI that's meant for development, so no integrated development environment. There's no ability, for instance, to have scheduling of scheduled jobs, etc. And creating clusters is not a trivial exercise. You basically have to tweak JSON files to tell it how many nodes you want, etc. So what you see in the Databricks on Azure is really easy. You get a UI, which is visual. We'll see that. It's got a lot of drag and drop and buttons, and you can navigate around. You get easy cluster creation. It even supports multi-user clusters so that you can share clusters with many people, which is kind of a nice feature. And Databricks has its own runtime. So instead of just running Spark, you're running the Databricks runtime, and that's supporting the clusters. It also has integration. It has its own role-based security, but it also integrates with Azure Active Directory, which is one of its nice perks because you don't even have to worry about it. You can go directly from the Azure portal, jump into your Databricks environment, and you're good to go. You get job scheduling, so you can schedule. Now, the programs in Databricks are called notebooks. It's just the way that you work with the environment. The nice thing about the notebooks, which is another feature of Databricks, and really my favorite feature of Databricks, is the Databricks notebooks. Because for one thing, you can write a notebook which can use multiple languages, unlike Jupyter or something. You can use the Spark SQL, you can use Python, you can use R, and you can use Scala, all in a single notebook, and you can interoperate between those things. Behind the scenes, I've learned recently how it does that. It uses the REPL, or the shell, to each one of those separate. So there is a Scala shell to Spark, there's a Python shell to Spark and R. Java does not have its own shell, I believe, and for that reason you cannot write Java code right within a notebook, but you can package it up into a jar file and then use it. Anyway, this is what you can do, and you also get good collaboration within Databricks. So the ideal thing for Databricks is you've got a team, you want to collaborate on data engineering and data science, and you've got analysts, etc. Perfect environment to do that. And again, kind of to emphasize this, on the right side you see the basic services provided by Spark. It's kind of pivoted, admittedly, but you get Spark SQL, you get MLlib, SysML for machine learning, Spark Streaming, and GraphX. And you can see you have different sort of managers, resource managers, Mesos, Yarn, and its standalone scheduler, and then core services. On the left is the UI that Databricks provides you. It provides other things, and I'm not going to talk about, like a REST API to do things, etc. But what you get here is the notebooks. So you can see on the left, I will call this very often the Azure Databricks portal. I haven't heard anyone else call it that. I'll coin a phrase there because it reminds me a lot of the Azure portal, and it feels like a portal. On the left side, you have your menu options. You click a button, and it brings up that particular blade or screen to go with it. And one of them is notebooks, which you can see here. That's how you work with something. If you've used Jupyter or Zeppelin notebooks, you get the idea. It also gives you integrated blob file storage, which is built in. It'll automatically, when you create your workspace in Azure, gives you and connects to your space blob storage. You get really, several clicks, and you can be running with a new cluster. If you're wondering, like HD Insight versus this, with HD Insight, you create your cluster and you define what you want. Databricks is sort of, again, it's this overarching UI, and you can have any number of clusters running or just sort of paused in the background, and you only pay for the ones that are running. So it's really nice that way, and it's really easy to create and maintain your clusters. As a job scheduler, as I mentioned, and it has that little button on the right, and many places will say permissions. You can secure objects, who can do what. It also has language extensions, so it is Spark, but there's a lot of enhancements around it, and Spark optimizations. Did I say it right? Spark. Trying to get that R in there, so let's jump in. So let me take a break here and show you what this looks like. So I'm going to go into, not where I want to be. So I'm going to go into Azure. Now I have this Databricks demo environment ready. So I'm going into the portal. I'm going to launch my workspace. That's all you got to do. You've already have created your workspace. Notice it's already authenticating me. It's integrated with Active Directory, which I really like because honestly I'm lazy. I want things to be as easy as possible. Anything you see with me is about parsimony. Give me as little work to do with the maximum benefit, and that's what I love about Databricks. It is really my favorite service on Azure. That's the God's honest truth. Love this service. It's really great. So what I'm going to do here now is, you can see when you come in here, you get things you've been working on. So there's my dashboard notebook, but I can also go to my Workspace to use that. So there, I can see the dashboard there. I'm going to need a cluster to be running. This one's been terminated, right? So I'm going to go along here. You see it's terminated. All I have to do is, notice when I hover over, things pop up, the action menu. This is one of the more, at least hard things to get used to in Databricks. You have to hover over things to get to certain things. And I'm going to just click on the little start button and confirm it. That's going to start my cluster. That's going to take a few minutes. Okay, we now have our cluster up and running. It took about 5 or 6 minutes, as I said. I'm going to go to Workspace, and I'm going to go to my ADB dashboard notebook, which is the one I want to demonstrate here. I'm going to walk through this notebook, and a few points. One of the things I will talk about also is, it's always useful in a dashboard to be able to, or in any kind of visual, to be able to have some sort of interaction. And that's, in other words, you might want to set properties like what year do you want to look at, what product group, etc. And that's done through what's called widgets. If you've seen Jupyter Notebooks has widgets, Azure Databricks Notebooks also support widgets. They don't provide the same level of flexibility as slicers and dicers do in, say, Power BI, but they're very powerful to be able to dynamically modify content without recoding, and that's really kind of the goal of a widget. One thing I noticed too, I'm learning a lot all the time with Databricks, so here's a tip that's totally unrelated, but if you're working with a notebook and you make changing code and you're playing around, and then you decide to go and say reload data or change the schema related to a table or something, you remember this data has potentially been already loaded on the nodes, and therefore it won't automatically refresh, and that's kind of a weird thing I had to get my head around. Makes sense, but it's not necessarily intuitive if you're kind of not used to thinking like that. If you disconnect from a cluster, so if I go here and we're to detach, it will actually refresh the state of the notebook, and it'll also force things to refresh. You can also refresh tables and things, but I found that's a good way to kind of clear the entire thing and restart, or you can just rerun the notebook. But when it's something like that, you really need to clear it. Another thing, a little tidbit there, is Databricks recommends that when you're going to get out of a notebook, when you leave it, it's a good idea to detach it anyway, so that the next time you come in, the state's not restored and you're not taking up memory on the head node. A little interesting thing. Okay, so there's 2 links you can find. There's one which has widgets documentation. I want to talk a little about widgets. I'm not going to get heavily into them. If people make comments and say, I'd like to see more on widgets, I can do more on that. I don't think I've done a video specifically on widgets yet. And the other thing is on visualization. So if you click on this link, you get a whole bunch of stuff here. There's several ways to create interactive widgets. I'm going to show you a couple. One is using the dbutils. dbutils is a way, DB stands for Databricks, or Databricks Utilities. It's a whole bunch of library things, a vast library of different things you can do within Databricks from dbutils. It's kind of independent of the different languages, which is nice. This particular interface is Scala, but it looks pretty much the same when you're using Python and stuff too for a lot of stuff. All right, so that's one thing. Go through here, you can see the dbutils, but we'll also see there's specific things for SQL. And if you go further down, you'll see some things about how to use it with Python, etc. So you can kind of take a look at that. Go back here. Okay, sorry, I'm in the wrong place. Let me go back to my, let me go back here. That was weird. Be careful when you click on links in notebooks. They pop you right out of where you are. So, okay. And you can go here, and this has information about the visualizations that are built into the output, cell output that you have in notebooks. So take a look at that. That has a lot of stuff. We're going to take a look at some of that. Now, I put this at the top because I'm going to be creating widgets, and this statement will remove any existing widgets. One of the things to note about it is that this is dbutils, but it's compatible with the Python language, which is the default part of this. So the API basically for dbutils is pretty consistent across different languages, R, Python, Scala, etc. And here I'm going to create, I just want to show you that if I want to create a drop-down, a widget that I could use, the way I would use dbutils, in this case the Python compatible version, is to do the dbutils widgets, and I'm saying drop-down. I give it a name. I give it a default value, and here I'm just using, I'm just loading it up with values. Let me do that, and you'll notice once it's done, it should pop up a widget. And you can see here now I've got this thing here. I think it's called an iterator. Got that going on. If I click on this settings for widgets, I can say pin it to the top so that as I scroll, I can access the widgets, which is my preference and the default. If I uncheck that, it will have to go back to the top to get to them. And when I make a change, I can say run access commands, things that are dependent on that widget, or I can say run the entire notebook, or I can say do nothing. So I'm going to leave the default run access commands, and that should trigger it when I want it to. Now that's going to affect the dashboard later, so we'll take a look at that. So I've created this widget, and when I want to use the widget, now again, this is Python code, all right? And I'm going to just use dbutils widgets get, and that will get the current value, and I'm going to display it here so you can see it. All right, so it displayed the 1. Okay, that's all it's going to take. If I go over here and change it to a 2, hopefully it will, yep, it shows that, and notice it automatically ran the code to redisplay it. Good. I'm not going to do a lot of stuff with the Python side of the interface. I'm going to do a lot with more SQL. Again, this isn't a widgets demo, but I don't think you can properly address a dashboard without looking at the widgets. So here I'm going to create a widget, a drop down, which is fiscal year, and I'm going to default to 2013. I'm using the AdventureWorks tables. If you're not familiar with that, it's a lot of stuff online, but it's basically sales information. AdventureWorks is a fictitious organization Microsoft created for training demos and stuff, so they're not using real data, but the organization is supposed to sell primarily bicycles and sporting equipment, but if you look at their sales numbers, it's like 90% bikes. So you see here, select distinct fiscal year from from internet sales, dim date, and when I'm joining it to dim date so I can get the fiscal year, and I want to make sure I'm only pulling in, I do a join here just so I only get ones that actually have data. It's a good idea. And if I do Control Enter on the cell, I should get now a widget that will support a drop down for fiscal year. Yeah, now you see my fiscal year. I can change it to what I want. And just to show you also, I've created that. Now this particular fiscal year was created with the SQL interface, but you can notice here in Python, I can also access it and see what it is. So different ways to get to the same thing. I'm going to create another one. I'm going to run it while I'm talking. This one, I'm creating one that's a category. It's a product category. I'll default to bikes. I'm using the English product category name from product category. I've renamed these. The original tables are from the Data Warehouse 2017 in SQL Server. And that version, it's really dim product category. I just call it AW product category. And here I'm doing it describe just to get the column names. And I'm not going to go heavily into this, but I'm creating a view. So I'll create this view here. And this is just going to consolidate some of the information I need for my product information. And this displays some of it. I want to kind of get over this SQL stuff. I have a whole video on SQL, so I don't want to belabor it. I'm going to rerun this. Probably don't even need to run this because I've already saved these views. And now I'm taking vSales. I'm creating a view called vSales Info with all this cool stuff in it. So I'm kind of prepping the data, so this kind of gives you a sense of how you would get the data ready. And now we have something here. Now before I even go further on the visuals, I really should have gone over here to show you that I've already created in this notebook a dashboard, and you can see, you know, all these things that are available. If I say present dashboard, it's got the dashboard here, and I can make changes here. I'll do this later, but you can see I've got this dashboard, sales, product, etc. And so this is something that you could give management, make available to people through the properties in Databricks to do that. So let me get out. When I want to go back, I just say exit, and then here I just say go back to my code view. So really the dashboard is kind of another view into your network. That's just, I mean, to your notebook, that's basically what it is. It's kind of painful that when you go out like that, you lose your place. So I'm going to create a new dashboard here. Now I've already got my visual, so all I have to do to create a new dashboard, and here we have plot options and things like that. I'm not getting too heavily in visuals, but we can go in here and play with what we want to see. I could do something like this, and it would change what I'm looking at. Maybe I want to look at category. I don't know what that would do. Nothing really here. Probably that would do a difference. Something like that. So you can do a lot of stuff with this. I'm going to leave it as is. what I want to do is just go to the cell. It has to be on the code side and click on the little bar here. That's like a little visual. Click on that and you can say, I'm going to create a new dashboard. Pops me to a new screen. I'm going to give it a name. So I'll call it YouTube demo. And then I will, that's already there. Now notice I can resize however I want. And I'm going to leave that there. I'm not going to try to do much. When I'm ready, I'll do a present dashboard. What I'm going to do now is say, great, let's go back to my code. And as I've mentioned, an annoying feature of Databricks is it kind of left me. It didn't bring me back where I was. And here, so this is just to kind of emphasize what's going on. I'm using SQL completely. And when I go down here, I can, by default, data will come up like this, just regular raw data. But this is not your ordinary display of data, because related to it, I have this ability to create visuals. And in here, I can do bar chart like that, or I can go to plot options and change that to a pie chart like I wanted, and then just say apply. And if I don't want the donut, I can even change it to a regular pie chart. So I've got a lot of options in there, so play with it, but you have a lot of flexibility. This is one of my favorite features as well, because I'm not doing, matplotlib, I'm not doing ggplot2 or any kind of, language. I can just play with it and see what I've got. Bear in mind though that when you're playing with these visuals, by default, the return will only be 1,000 rows. Spark is, by definition, does lazy evaluation. It won't run code unless it has to, and it must return data to the head node for this visualization to take place, which means it gives you 1,000 rows and hopes that's enough. My advice is make sure you aggregate your data and try to make sure it's a small set of rows if you're going to use this. Just be careful you don't miss data when you're doing visuals. All right, so we've got that. This is now an example where I'm going to use Python, and I want to do the same thing. The key here is this display statement. In Python and R, if I do display, and I believe Scala, if I do a display and then the data frame name, it uses the rich support of visualizations and sorting, etc., that are available in the output. If I don't, it's more like you're in Jupyter and it just kind of dumps text to the window. So in here, I'm creating this SDFS sales info, and I'm using the SQL interface just to make it easy to get this Spark data frame. And then if I run it, Control Enter, and that's going to go run it, and there it is. So this is cool. I will pin that also to my dashboard, my YouTube demo. That's great. And again, you can download data, all kinds of stuff. I just want to kind of make the point here. One of the things you will need to do if you want to use Python visualizations like Matplotlib, and I'm going to do one with Seaborn, you need to collect the data somehow. You need to get the data which is distributed. In this case, a subset has been returned. You can see it here. It's telling you 1,000 rows. But if I want to use the native Python open source Python and R do not understand the distributed nature of Spark and only work when you work with data on the head node. So I'm going to create a PDF, which is not a PDF as you think of, but a Python data frame from the Spark data frame. And the collect method will force an evaluation which will collect the data. It's small enough to do this. If you got a lot of data, do not do this because it will try to return all the data to the head node. It could crash your cluster. It's not a pretty picture, but I know this is a small subset, so I'm going to just run it. And now it's created a new data frame, a PDF underscore V sales info, and I can run this graphic using that and kind of step through it once it comes back. But this is all straight Python code, with the exception that I'm using this display statement. So notice I'm using Seaborn, all this kind of stuff. I'm not doing my VentureWorks data. I'm just doing one to demo. But I can say g.fig at the end. That's the visual that's been created. And the display allows me to look at this, which is really cool. And I'm going to pin that also to my YouTube demo dashboard. Go down a little further. I want to show you how to do the same thing if you're doing Spark. So here, little thing, when you're doing SQL in Python, it's spark.sql, but when you're using, and notice when I'm using Python, it's a Python default notebook. The only way you can work with Python and Spark is to use PySpark. That's the module which connects you to, is the API wrapper around Spark. But when you use R, there's actually Spark R and Sparkly R. And for that reason, the notebook does not pre-select one for you, so you do need to tell it which one you want to use. So I'm bringing in Spark R, and I'm going to use the SQL statement again. This time I'm going to be getting an R data frame, but this is still a Spark data frame, and I'm going to use the display as well, and run it. Goes. One thing I should also point out that I really like also about the visuals is when you rerun code that has a certain visual, it keeps the properties of the visual. It doesn't sort of reset your visual and you got to go recreate it. It remembered everything I had for that visual and just refreshes the data. So that's kind of nice. So that's using the display property. But again, maybe I want to use open source R code because you've got ggplot2, you've got some really good utilities. So here I'm bringing in Spark R again, but I'm using an open source package called Psych, and I'm creating a local R data frame in this case, and I'm collecting the data, doing a sample, etc. And then I'm going to display it here. So let me run this again. And so you can see I get this nice correlation plot, and I'm going to again take that and say put that in a YouTube demo. Okay, now I did want to talk about something else. Spark data frames using PySpark have some pandas-like features, and if you look at this, this is one of them. So this case, this Python data frame, I can do by tacking on the methods, I can do a group by, a sum, and an order by, and get this visual. And because I wrap it in the display again, that says basically I want to show it in the Databricks notebook output visual, just like we've seen, and I'm going to put that here and checkbox it. It's cool. All right, now here I'm creating a view, and this view is going to be using AW Internet Sales, dim date, and v product info. Now I haven't walked through all the code, but I've attempted to give you all of those files. So if you go to the GitHub/shared bcafra key and then find the data files that go with this, it's all zipped up. Just download that zip file, and when you do, you can hopefully reload those tables into Databricks just by using the data piece. Trying to wave with my hand, you can't see it. Over in the data side, you can do that. So I'm just going to create this view. I have a whole video on SQL and SQL notebooks, but you can see it's very rich. You can create views. You can do a lot of cool stuff with it. So if you're used to using databases, as I am, I find that really nice. Not going to bother worrying about that. Now we're going to just kind of show, we've done these widgets, but we haven't really used them yet. So now we will. We're going to do a SQL block of code. I'm selecting everything from the sales product. And notice I'm saying where the category is equal to the get argument category, and the fiscal year is get argument fiscal year. And if I run this, it should default to bikes as the category. Notice the last time was clothing, bikes as the category, and fiscal year is 2013. So I'm going to do Control Enter. And we see bikes 2013. Now I can change that and say I'd actually rather see clothing, and I'll say 2012 and do Control Enter. And you see clothing 2012. One thing I do recommend is when you do the plot options, make sure you're putting the filter criteria somewhere in this so that you can see it, because if you don't, it's hard to confirm, like what was it using. One thing that you'll see in the dashboard is it has a tendency to reset. Even though it will filter by what you say, it sort of resets the widgets back to what the defaults are. So, okay, so we can see that there. I'm going to make sure that's pinned. Okay, I should have done, did I pin that as well? Good. I'll make sure that's pinned. Okay, we're good. So that's how we can, by using that, we can modify, using this get argument, real simple. We're able to pull it in and make use of it. What's nice is it's just handy, even if you're not doing a dashboard. If you want to just make something easy, you don't have to keep tweaking and changing things. Or maybe you just want to hand someone a notebook and say, just change the drop down and run the cell to what you need. It's kind of handy. Okay, this is another one. In this case, I'm getting the category, and that's the only thing I want to get. And I'm going to run this. So we're looking at clothing. I'm going to change this to bikes again, just so we can see that it will actually change it. Okay, and now you see bikes. And I'm going to pin that to the dashboard. That's great. And now what I want to do is go to the YouTube demo dashboard. And one of the things you've noticed is, hopefully, is that I can, well, you can resize here. What you've noticed, hopefully, is that I can have any number of dashboards because it's just whatever you want to do. So I can pick and choose and create ones that fit different people. So it looks good here. I've got some, I can drag and drop and rearrange this stuff. You can play around, float, etc., how you want to look at it. I'm going to drag this open a little bit, make it a little more even. And when I'm ready, I can just say, okay, present the dashboard. And voila, I have a dashboard. Now, maybe I don't really want it. It's still got what was in the, let me go back, make sure bikes is really there. So if I say update, it's still going with what was in the notebook when I last ran the cells. So let's do an update. Hopefully it will restore it back to what it was. And I forgot I do have code in there that does the country drop down. We're not using it, so I tried to cut it out, but it's snuck back in there. But you can see now the total sales amount by education is now showing bikes instead of clothing. And we can see some of these do not filter by the drop down widgets. And so one thing to bear in mind is make sure that if you're creating visuals and widgets that interact with them, that the visuals are consistently displaying and tied to the widgets, because you don't want to be showing total aggregates and somebody thinks, oh, you only limited it to a certain country, but you didn't. Like in the case I did this, on the right you see that homeowner one, and I didn't do anything to filter it, so it's everything. Okay, and you can see though that I've got my built-in, these titles where you see our custom visual and things, that's coming from the title on the cell, I believe. There's something called a cell title. So you can see all this wonderful stuff. And that's about it. Couple of caveats I will show you. If you notice, if I do something like this, change this to clothing, I can change this to say 2012. What's going to happen when I do the update? It will filter the way I've asked it to, but it seems to reset the widgets back to the defaults. Let's see if I am right, because fiscal year, for instance, I set to 2012. Category should now be clothing. Not sure why it does that. I want to call it a bug. I tried to Bing and Google around to see why that happens, but it just seems like the default. I think it's because it's refreshing essentially the notebook, and so it resets that way. A couple of caveats also while this is running. When I looked at the documentation in Databricks, it warns you about a couple of things, which I'll mention, but one of them is that if you want to interoperate between like Python, R, and SQL and doing widgets, it's not so good at passing things between them. So they recommended creating separate notebooks by language. I hadn't really played much with that, but so if you do run into issues of that nature, take a look at that documentation. I gave you the links and see, you know, what it says and do that. But I've been able to get this to work pretty well and seems to be pretty good. So let me go out here for a minute. And I'm going to go back in, go to my view, go to code. All right, and that gives me my widgets. So we're good to go there. And again, when I don't want these widgets anymore, remember I have this good old thing here. All I have to do is just run that, and you'll see those widgets disappear. So check out those links, and let me get back to my demo. Okay, and this is part of what I was talking. I pulled this off of their help. The link is in this. It's docs.databricks.com, notebooks.widgets.html. Another thing to be aware of with Databricks is it tends to have two sets of documentation. When Microsoft created Azure Databricks, they created an entirely separate set of documentation, and it has its own nuances and features. And then there's just Databricks.com's documentation, which tend to focus out more on AWS and Databricks. Generally, they're pretty close to the same, but if there is a difference, then if you're using Azure Databricks, obviously use that documentation. So this is where they're talking about this. This is where they're saying if you want to pass arguments between different languages in a notebook, then they recommend you create a widget and pass it around. and you have to run it cell by cell. It it has problems, I guess, passing arguments between different types of languages in the notebook. So just be aware of that. Right, wrapping up or heading into the final lap here. Features of Databricks Dashboards. They are ideal for data science team collaboration, as is Databricks. So when you want to say what's the best use case to use dashboards in Databricks, think of, maybe you have a couple hundred people, really large or multiple data science teams sharing the same workspace and collaborating. That's a great time to use dashboards so that people who are either collaborating can get a high-level view of a notebook and what's happening. Great way to have maybe senior people be able to help more junior people on the data science team to say, yeah, you seem to be getting a lot of null values. You seem to be having, looks like your numbers look a little low to me. Maybe you should take a look at some other things. It's a good way for management. You get managers, directors, VPs, or whatever. Assuming they have some comfort and they're part of the Databricks environment already, or maybe you add them in, great place to give insight to what's happening. Databricks is about creating business insight and solutions like predictive models and things like that. And so it's ideal for when people are interested in things, even as they're being built, I think. So maybe they're not completely done. It's not turnkey. We don't have the final prediction of fraud detection or sales forecasting, but we're learning a lot as we go, and this is a great time to share what you're doing and how it's working. Once you get there, though, it's also not a bad place to share the results, as opposed to having to create something separate in Power BI for that and that kind of thing. It's at the end of the day, dashboards provide highlights of notebooks, so they're really tied to the notebook. So if you're looking for something completely different, it's like Monty Python, now for something completely different, probably not the best place to do that. That would be a better Power BI thing. Now, an interesting thing I find is that you can share static notebooks. So if you don't need to have widgets that a user can customize, but there's certain visuals and things that would be valuable, and maybe you update it daily, twice a day, even every couple hours, depending on how much it takes to do it. You can run the notebooks, refresh them, and the output in notebooks is always retained. You do not need a cluster to look at a notebook or to look at the output of a notebook, which means, and I tested this, you can actually go into dashboards and look at the visuals of a dashboard, no compute used. So there's a real good sell point, because you're not paying anything really except for your storage, which is minimal. In Databricks, if you're not using a cluster, that's the heavy duty. A Spark cluster is the heavy duty cost. You can look at static stuff like that with no cost. When you say I want to now rerun things by making widgets changes and rerunning code, you're going to need to have a cluster behind that. I like the fact too that if in this day and age when everyone's worried about data security and making sure only people who are supposed to need things to the need to know basis, it's great that it's all in Databricks. You've already given people, these are the developers, these are the management people related to this data in this project. When you replicate that kind of security and extend it in something like Power BI, it's more, I think parsimony, more work. You're going to make sure you know who's getting what. There's the chance that somebody could potentially try to extract data and do other things. Here it's more self-contained. So if you can do it, it's kind of nice that way. It reduces the amount of work you have to do. And my favorite part also is, say I'm working on a project and I'm doing this analysis and I'm building all this stuff, I probably have some really interesting and very useful visuals, or I could create a few extra ones really easily. Since it's in my notebooks, it's a freebie. There's no overhead. There's no extra work involved. It's just there. And by just pinning a few things to a dashboard, other people can see them. If you use Power BI, it's a completely separate development effort. Yeah, you've got the stuff, you've got the Spark nodes and the tables, but somebody has to completely build reports and visuals around the data. It's not really leveraging much of the work I'm doing, especially in terms of visualization. So that's another really big plus. But why? What about Power BI advantages over Databricks? Well, for one thing, Power BI is built to be an end-user tool. That's what Microsoft wants. The idea is self-service business intelligence. That's the promise of Power BI. So it doesn't require programming. Now, I know a lot of consultants. It's a great place to be, where you can use DAX and MDX and any number of the languages that can be used to extend Power BI's functionality. But by and large, you do not have to use those languages. You can do everything with the visual interfaces, minimal coding or no coding. So it can be a very lower technical skill level. With Power BI, the real value is kind of thinking about storytelling with data in this sort of creative aspect. Notebooks require coding. No way around that. You are writing code. You also, with Power BI, have a vast library of visualizations. There's community ones, there's a built-in library. It's a very wide-ranging ways to interpret, visualize, and tell stories with data. Now, as you've seen with the Databricks notebooks, it's fairly limited. If you want to use the built-in visuals, it's nice, it's good, but when you want to get really advanced and do really slick stuff, then you would have to use R or Python or Scala libraries that will give you more of that extended functionality. And you can do a lot there. And I've seen things, I have not played with it yet, but I know you can use like Bokeh and some of the other more active Plotly to do even more interactive visualizations. I haven't tried it, so I can't say too much to it. But the point is, could you do really cool advanced stuff with the Databricks dashboards? I'd say yes. I don't think you're going to get as much ease of use, especially in the interactive part of it. But there's some really powerful libraries, but it ain't easy. That's going to take more technical skills. Power BI is designed to share visuals. So if you've got a couple of thousand people or more in a company and you want a sort of enterprise-wide BI analytics platform that's going to show all the visuals, then Power BI is designed to do that. I think the dashboards in Databricks are really going to be more controlled, more limited. It's people who are interested in the ongoing projects that are being done in Databricks, and maybe a little bit more. And if you need a few other people, you can certainly add them in. But you don't want to have 20,000 people getting into your Databricks workspace. Power BI has a rich user interaction support, as I mentioned, so the slicers and the dicers and the way that the visuals interact and connect to each other is definitely something that's a big step up there's no doubt about it, over Databricks. And the other thing about Power BI is it has an extensive ability to connect to just about any data source you can imagine, including a Databricks cluster or Spark or Hadoop or any SQL relational database you can think of, just about anything. With Databricks is on Spark, and anything it's going to do has to be Spark. So you'd have to bring that data into Spark first to do anything in terms of visuals. And that can be expensive. And it's also, even if you accept that piece of it, while Databricks can bring in quite a few sources, anything in Azure that I can think of, from Cosmos to Blob to SQL, if you start to get into the more esoteric things, you say, I want to bring in Ingress or DB2 on a mainframe, you might run into more issues. It gets more challenging. Pretty clearly, the Power BI range of data sources outweighs what Databricks can do, and that's kudos to Microsoft on doing that. Conclusion. Power BI is best used when data visualization is your goal. If you're looking for an enterprise-wide enterprise-grade visualization platform, and I avoid the word analytics because it's kind of implies a lot more, sometimes like machine learning, but to the extent analytics is maybe some machine learning integration, but primarily visualization and reporting, then Power BI is a better choice. It's designed to be that kind of thing, especially when you don't want to have a lot of heavy technical capability required in programming. Databricks is best when you want insights on the work happening in Databricks, or to provide some highlights of what's going on. And if the people are already in your environment, you've got a Databricks collaboration environment, Workspace, then it's kind of a no-brainer. It's there, it's free at that point. You might as well use it. And there's some interactive, kind of you can leverage both. There might be reasons to use both, and I think that makes sense. So in truth, it's probably not too often that you'd say, let's just scrap the Power BI and go with Databricks, unless you're already in the Databricks workspace and you hadn't realized that it's got a lot of visualization capabilities that you can share. And so maybe you're going to Power BI and you don't need to, because it's really meant to be sort of a single area that's going to need it, more your data scientists and data engineers. So that's my conclusion on that. So let's wrap up by where we've been. We talked about what Databricks is, and we've learned that it's a wrapper around Spark that makes Spark basically a lot easier to use and get up and running. We saw how to create a Databricks dashboard. Hope you were riveted by that demo. We looked at the features of dashboards, and there's a lot of good things. It is not as slick as Power BI, but it's still pretty powerful. It does have a few little oddities. As I mentioned, I noticed that it wasn't keeping the settings I put on the drop downs, the widgets, but it did update things. So, and there are some things around the languages you have to take a look at, but it is powerful. And we looked at Power BI versus Databricks dashboards and came to the conclusion that it's not always best to go with Databricks Dashboards, but there is a use case for both. Right, so thank you for watching. Let me go back here. Kind of lost my slides. Thank you for watching. Please share, like, and until next time, thank you.